Hello and good afternoon. I apologize so much for the technology delay, but now we are all up and running. I am Alexis Smith, and I am the Educational Exchange and Event Program Coordinator with the Office of International Programs. Thank you so much, everyone, joining us in person and online. We got some people on Zoom as well. And this is Foundations of Global Health in conjunction with the International Orthopedic Trauma Collaborative. Just a little bit about Foundations of Global Health. Global health is an area for study, research, and practice that places a priority on improving health and achieving equity in health for all people worldwide. Global health emphasizes transnational health issues, determinants, and solutions, involves many disciplines within and beyond the health sciences, and promotes interdisciplinary collaboration, and is a synthesis of population-based prevention with individual-level clinical care. And that is from the Consortium of Universities for Global Health. Global health is a varied and rich discipline to which many healthcare providers, researchers, and faculty aspire to being professionally engaged. With our being a globally connected world, this ongoing programming through the Office of International Programs is designed to feature those in our KUMC community engaged in the field of global health. KUMC's faculty, researchers, and clinicians, our international partners, and our community partners. Presenters will share their personal journeys, educational backgrounds, mentors, books and articles that gave inspiration, challenges, lessons learned, successes, epiphanies, life-changing moments, and even the heartbreaks. This series is meant to provide a platform for both presenters and participants to participate in conversations while developing foundational knowledge and exploring best practices for engagement in the discipline of global health. We will be back with presentation number 3. Wow, I feel like we just got started on October 22nd. So we'll be back in about 3 weeks, back in Beller and on Zoom at noon. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Archie Headings. Dr. Headings is a practicing orthopedic surgeon in the University of Kansas Health System. He is also director of an international orthopedic trauma fellowship that focuses on alleviating disparities in trauma care throughout Africa. Without further ado, Dr. Archie Headings.
Thanks everybody for coming. We're a little bit behind, so I'm going to kind of dive right into it. I know a lot of you saw our last lecture we did, which was an introduction to orthopedic trauma. Today, we want to step a little bit further into this. And for everybody that was at that lecture, particularly the students, you know, one thing I told you was, they said, you may not be going into orthopedics exactly in terms of like orthopedic trauma, that is, you may go into orthopedics, or you may go into another field of medicine. But if you get anything out of these lectures, hopefully what you'll get out of them is kind of a roadmap, maybe of whatever type of medicine you go into, how you can take that medicine that you're doing, and then you can use it to help people. Maybe you don't have the advantage of receiving that type of medicine. So what we're discussing is a brief overview of the African Trauma Initiative. I have up here our first 3 fellows that we've graduated. If you go from left to right, Dr. Solomon Goshu, Dr. Abby Workey, and Dr. Patrick Kinda. Dr. Solomon and Dr. Abby are from Ethiopia. Dr. Solomon is the first foot and ankle surgeon in Ethiopia. Dr. Abby is the first American-trained orthopedic trauma surgeon in Ethiopia, and he's one of 6 orthopedic trauma surgeons there. And Dr. Kinda is the first orthopedic trauma surgeon in Zambia, and he also serves in the Congo as well, where they have no orthopedic trauma surgeon as well. What is the mission of the African Trauma Initiative? It's to combat the growing trauma epidemic through the development of self-sustaining trauma centers in Africa. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we came to that mission today, but we're going to, at every lecture, there's a couple things I'm going to repeat because they're just kind of a basic principle of what we're going after here. And that is this: you do not have to discover a cure to a disease or develop a new surgical technique to have a huge impact on the health of others. Said another way, the impact of a discovery or advancement in medicine does not end when it just reaches your sphere. Here in America, we have a lot of medical technology, and if we sustain certain injuries or if we happen to contract a particular illness, those things can be treated. But that doesn't necessarily exist in other parts of the world. And in those parts of the world where they can't receive that care, it's as if that discovery was never made. So you finding a way to bring that technology to that part of the world has a huge impact on them. Well, this was the core group of our African Trauma Initiative, and we have a lot of medical students here. I just want to point out 3 medical students here, Jack Nolte, Jack Aries, and then Jonathan Dahlman, all in orthopedics right now, and all without which this never could have started. And then up on the top right, Kim Connolly, this project also never would have happened without her. And on the bottom right, a community orthopedic arthroplasty surgeon who also volunteered his time to teach our fellows. We grew into this, and you'll see a lot of people in the audience will see their picture there. And then we've expanded beyond this as well as this continues to grow throughout the university. So what's trauma? We just need to lay a foundation. If you look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary, definition of it, it's an injury. We're speaking of physical injuries that occur to living tissue. Trauma kills lots of people, all right? If you look at it in terms of global numbers, it's not the major killer of people. And you can see that the 2 main killers of people worldwide, it's cancer and ischemic heart disease. But if you put trauma up against, say, HIV, malaria, or TB right now, trauma kills more people than all of those combined. And these numbers are increasing. In fact, if you look at the numbers from the World Health Organization, trauma is expected to continue to increase into the 2030s, is what they're expecting. Can somebody help me put up the view so I can see my notes? I'm so sorry. Does anybody know how to do that? Do you know how to do that? Sorry, we're streamlining these lectures. I just want to make sure I don't miss something. What was that view? You know what? Yeah, because I have to. Yeah. Do you know, Laura?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not.
Laura saves the day. Yeah.
You can also just take this.
Yes.
Should be
Thank you. It's like the
presentation view.
yeah.
I
No
think it's,
space. Yeah.
it should be the convene button. Right here.
Then it should be at like the top left.
No.
You can use my phone. I can use here.
It's okay.
Yeah, I don't know why this isn't showing it like
It's okay.
a slideshow.
Display setting with the monitor.
There you go.
It's been a technical. It's okay.
Just
Okay.
Sorry about that. Okay. But basically trauma, it's a public health crisis, but it's a public health crisis that affects a particular part of the world. Because when you look at all those trauma deaths that are occurring, it's quite a few, 93% of those are occurring in low to middle income countries. That's where they're occurring. So, and as a result, not only does trauma kill, but trauma also disables. It's the major cause of disability in low to middle income countries. Let me back. And it's the leading cause of death in those under 35 to 45 years of age. So when you're talking about trauma and the population it affects a relatively young population. Mothers, fathers, college students, adolescents, young children. That's who trauma is killing. And that's who trauma is disabling. So when this is just a graph, we went over this in the last lecture, we'll go over it quickly, but if you look at disability adjusted life years of all these illnesses that we discussed, so cancer, ischemic heart disease, infection, you'll see injuries, this is at least the 2016 numbers, injuries produce the most of disability adjusted life years. And that's because of the population it's affecting. You know, when you're killing people in their 40s and younger, that's a much different thing as opposed to cancer. The peak death for cancer patients is in their 90s. Well, that doesn't, I mean, people don't live much past that. So there's not a lot of disability years after that. Ischemic heart disease, most people sustain their first heart attack in their 70s. And that's not necessarily the one that kills them. So you can see trauma is affecting a much younger population. As a result, it has a much heavier burden on society. If you take out a mother, it just doesn't, if you kill a mother, or if a mother dies or a mother becomes disabled, what effect does that have on the family? It's tremendous, as opposed to somebody dying in their 90s. So that's just the purpose of this slide. It's showing the burden on society that trauma has. Well, what causes trauma? What is it that's causing it? It's four main things. If you look at this graph here, it's road traffic accidents. That's number one. Number two is interpersonal violence, either conflict related or between individuals. Number three is self-harm, so people committing suicide. And then number four are falls. And this category of falls is kind of a category that consists of older people. It's a bimodal age distribution. Older people that fall and fracture their hips, but then also people who are working unsafe jobs and they fall and they get injured. So those are the four main causes of trauma. So as we go through this, what you'll see we've done in the African Trauma Initiative is we've tried to come up with a cause of this epidemic. So just to give you an idea of how I started in international health, I first started going to Eastern Europe and Romania. And that was one of the poorest countries in Europe. When I started going there, it had recently entered the European Union. It was coming out of the fall of the Soviet Union. And they didn't have a lot of healthcare resources. They had a lot of trauma. They couldn't treat it all as quickly as they would have liked, and they didn't have all the medical technology they needed. Over the years, I saw as the European Union put money into Romania and education, how that healthcare system changed dramatically. So I was able to watch this occur in a country. Then for the first time, I went to Africa. And what I saw there was eye-opening in terms of the numbers of patients that were overwhelming the system and the amount of resources they had to treat those patients. Why is that? You know, when you see a problem like that and you want to alleviate it, you have to ask yourself, why is this occurring? Why is there this epidemic of trauma in Africa? So we have a solution, but the solution is based upon what we perceive the etiology to be. And we're just going to kind of quickly go through that. And let me check my time here because I don't want to talk too much. Okay. All right. So we're going to go through this kind of quickly. And by the way, everybody feel free to get food because, I mean, I got so many people to come here by advertising this food.
Yes.
So yeah, do not feel bashful about getting up to get some food. So, but the highest concentration of trauma, it occurs in Africa. So let's go through the four main causes of trauma and let's look at that, how it pertains to Africa. So if you look at workplace fatality rates for 100,000 workers, look at this map of the globe. And then if you look at the incidence here, you know, the more dark you get in terms of the red color there, I guess that'd be burgundy, you know, that's the higher incidence rate. Well, look at Africa. So, and if you look at these numbers, the highest place of workplace fatalities in the world is in Africa. Road traffic mortality, we looked at this at our last discussion on an introduction to orthopedic trauma. You can see that road traffic mortality rate, you know, compared to the rest of the world, it's very high, it's very concentrated in Africa. In terms of conflict-related violence, Africa rules the world in terms of conflict-related violence deaths. And in terms of suicide rate, Africa leads the world in suicides. I'm not getting down on Africa, and I put a graph up here that you can see all throughout the world, suicide rates are coming down. It's interesting. But if you follow this graph, if you come out here, this goes up to 2019, you can see Africa just inched out Europe, I believe. So they're all relatively close, but Africa still leads the world in suicide. Well, you put all that together, you can see why Africa has such a high incidence of trauma. But why is it? Why is it Africa is so affected by trauma? What is it? So it's a public health, right? Trauma, as I've put it forth here, it's a public health problem. And if you think of other public health problems, how have we solved those? Like take, for example, neural tube defects. When I was younger, I can remember as a child raising money for March of Dimes. March of Dimes was a campaign to figure out how to solve neural tube defects. And one of the things we found out was it's due to a folate deficiency. As you guys have gone through schooling, you found out that early on in pregnancy, before you even know you're pregnant, if you have a folate deficiency, it can lead to a neural tube defect like spina bifida. So we came up with these campaigns or these policies to supplement our food with folate, and it resulted in a dramatic decrease of our neural tube defects. So we figured out the etiology of neural tube defects. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to figure out what is the etiology of this trauma epidemic? What's causing it? Well, one reason why Africa, I think, is so susceptible to trauma is because it's the youngest continent. I have here, this is just some of the people. By the way, our newest fellow is here, Dr. Beza, right there. Raise your hand, Dr. Beza. And so this is part of his team. These are young physicians, but right here, this young lady right there is the chairman of the department. It is, when you go to Ethiopia, the average age in Ethiopia is 15. It's hard to wrap your head around that. The average age in America is like 40-something. So it is a young country. By the way, I love that environment. It's a lot of fun, but this is a young group. Well, it's young because just in general, the continent is young. But with that youth comes a lot of human capacity. I mean, there's a lot of people that can do a lot of work. Think about how hard we have finding people to do a job in America. That's not a problem I've seen in Ethiopia. There are a lot of people there, young and willing to work. They have a tremendous amount of human capacity. Poverty strongly affects Africa. If you look at the World Bank estimates, I'm sorry, I had these in my notes, and if you want them specifically, I can get them for you. But there's like 56 nations in Africa, and 23 of them are considered low to middle income. 23 of them are considered low income, and that is just that is, if you look at the world over, a large number of the low income countries in the world are concentrated in Africa. And then in addition, Africa is rich in natural resources. Why is he talking about this? What does this have to do with the etiology of trauma? We're going to get to it. But if you look at what Africa has to offer in terms of natural resources, it's rich in diamonds, it's rich in gold, it's rich in copper. It has the world's largest platinum and chromium deposits. The Manhattan Project, which was what America used to develop its nuclear bomb that brought it to global dominance, the majority of that uranium came from the Congo. So there are huge uranium stores in Africa. So, and I just have here a news clipping of second largest diamond ever, 2,492 carats unearthed in Botswana. And you can see this gentleman holding it up. But if you look here, who owns this? A Canadian mining company, right? This isn't an African company. This is a Canadian mining company. Where am I going with this? What does all this have to do with trauma? Okay. Well, let's put some things together. Okay. We have the African nations, which have a tremendous youth and human capacity, tremendous natural resources, largely impoverished, and they desire to elevate themselves out of poverty. Who wouldn't, right? Who wouldn't? If you're impoverished, if you have to fight for your next meal, if your children are sick and you can't take care of them because you can't pay for their medical bills, or you can't even get medical care, you want to elevate yourself out of that. And you'll see if you look at like Ethiopia even has a document of here's how we're going to move from a low-income country to a middle-income country. They want to do that for their populace. I think any good government would do that. You know what I think I'm going to do? I think I'm going to say this table go get food. So let's rotate because everybody needs to eat. So let's start over there. You guys go get food, and then we'll move to this table. How's that sound? So don't feel guilty about getting up to get food. And then if you have questions, you can ask as we come to the panel discussion. But moving on. So that's what you've got on the African nation side. Tremendous youth, tremendous natural resources, largely impoverished, and a desire to come out of poverty. What do we have in the richer nations? We want African resources. We wanted them, right? Really during World War II, we needed that uranium. We needed to win a war. Now, if you read on this, everybody's moving toward renewable energy, right? We're trying to be responsible stewards, of the energy that we use and of the earth. A lot of these resources that we need to develop renewable energies are in Africa. They're not all just there, but a lot of them are there. And we need human capacity, right? We need somebody to do labor for us. It's just look at how much migrant labor occurs here in the U.S. And we have the ability to make financial, political, and military investments in Africa. So if you have richer nations that want something out of Africa, and then you have Africans that want to elevate themselves out of poverty, and in some respects, the countries are competing against each other. It's not just like one country has the diamonds and one country has the gold. So when these countries are negotiating with richer nations, they can say, look, either you give us the best deal or you can't negotiate with anybody. So what do you get when you take richer nations that want something from a continent and a continent that's impoverished and desperately wants to come out of poverty? Well, here's what you get. You get chaotic industrialization, rapid societal change, political unrest, and internal conflicts and proxy wars. Where am I going with this? Well, let's talk a little bit about chaotic industrialization. This is one of the things why there was such a disconnect in my mind when I went to the trauma center in Ethiopia. That they made this trauma center, Abbott Hospital. It's where Dr. Beza comes from, in 2015. Here's the sky. Here's part of the skyline to Addis Ababa, and then next to that's one of our business interns, Sterling Anderson. So he's done a lot of work for us on helping develop our hospital business plan. But look at this skyline. This skyline is more impressive than Kansas City. But this is their trauma center. It is a hotel that was converted into a trauma center. Now, how many trauma centers do we have in Kansas City for a population of 2 million something? We've got like 4 to 6, depending on who's calling them a trauma center, but that's what we've got. How many orthopedic trauma surgeons do we have? About 10. This serves the entire nation. So, yes, this is chaotic industrialization. Yeah, okay. You say, wait, these skyscrapers are amazing. The skyline's incredible. But you have a trauma center that is a hotel that was converted into a trauma center. How is that? Well, there's reasons why. Chaotic industrialization is this process whereby certain industries are built up in a society, whereas others are neglected. So you have rapid development of, let's move to this table right here, Dr. Beza's table. Carrick, will you feed my fellow? Make sure we need, yes. So if you look at official statistics for Ethiopia, road traffic deaths more than doubled in the 12-year period between 2007 and 2018. If you look at their conservative numbers, about one person dies in Ethiopia every 2 hours from a road traffic accident. Those are conservative numbers. If you look at the World Health numbers, they're about 10 times that. That's kind of hard to wrap your head around. But this increase in road traffic deaths occurred during a period when the road network was more than doubled, and it plans to triple its express highways over the next 10 years. Where is this money coming? It's coming from what's called foreign direct investment. Why are roads being built? Why do they need so many roads? Well, if you need a resource, if you need a diamond, or if you need platinum, or you need chromium, you need to make a mine. You need to make the mine really quickly, but then you just can't. Once you harvest it, you got to have a road to take it out of that mine to a port. So roadways are, if you're going to mine something or produce a good, you have to get it out. So that's why roadways are being made very rapidly. And we're going to talk about this. We don't want to get into the weeds of it, but it just makes the point. These roads have been made not by Africa paying for these roads, not because they said they need these roads necessarily, but because they've been paid for by richer nations who want something. There's a kicker to it, though, but then after they make the roads for them, they then make them pay it back. So they make them pay the money back for the money that the foreign nation paid to build the road, even though it benefited that nation. So here's just a graph, and this graph comes out of this United Nations Economic Commission for Africa on the Road Safety Performance Review for Ethiopia. So and by the way, the chaotic industrialization there is so bad with respect to the mismatch between the amount of roadways, compared to the amount of trauma centers to handle the road trauma. Even if Ethiopia right now tripled the number of trauma centers it had, it still would not have enough trauma centers to handle the amount of trauma that's coming in. What about how does chaotic industrialization affect workplace-related injuries? Think about what it takes to make a mine in America. Think about all the checks and balances you have to go through to ensure the miners are safe, to ensure that the waste disposal is done in a safe fashion, to ensure that the roadways in and the roadways out are safe. Think about all that goes into that. Those checks and balances don't necessarily exist in these African nations. Remember, they have a desire to get out of poverty. And so what you'll find is this one article points out is that the rate of occupational related injuries is dramatically increasing in Africa. The Organization of Occupational Health and Safety Services in these nations where they're getting lots of money to build up industries very quickly, their bureaucracy in order to oversee these industries is not growing at a comparable rate. So if you have a bureaucracy that checks out workplaces that's not growing as fast as the workplaces are being created, they can't look out for the workers. In Ethiopia in particular, we're talking about a lot about Ethiopia, but there's been some studies there that show 1 in 3 workers have sustained a significant work-related injury. And as we go through this, and if you look at some of our reels and you look at some of the working conditions that these African workers have to work in, you will not be surprised at the amount of workplace injuries that occur. Well, with the harvesting of resources comes competition for those resources. And if you look at conflict-related deaths around the world, I think it's Africa, even with the Ukraine war, even with the Gaza conflict, Africa still leads the world in the number of conflict-related deaths. It's just not something we hear about. But this is just a graph that comes from the Peace Research Institute out of Oslo, and it just shows state-based armed conflicts in Africa from 1946 to present. And if you look at this light blue level here, you can see, look how that has grown. This is internationalized civil conflict. What is internationalized civil conflict? Internationalized civil conflict is where you have 2 warring parties. They may be within a country, and they're each vying for control of the country. But say that country is the Congo, which sits on a lot of uranium, and say China wants the uranium and America wants the uranium. But one side is sympathetic to the Chinese and one side is sympathetic to the Americans. Well, what are you going to do? Well, each richer nation starts to arm the other side. What does that do? What that does is it gives those sides weapons that they never could have afforded before, that have a tremendous amount of increased lethality. And so I see people shaking their heads, but that's what happens. And so by other nations wanting something, they want a government sympathetic to them so they can get from that nation what they want. They increase the amount of deaths due to trauma, due to this conflict, by increasing the lethality of the war. Here's a good example of that happening. If you look at Burkina Faso, it's a country in Africa rich in gold. And you see this gentleman saying next to President Putin, but it says Burkina Faso was a close ally of former colonial France, but it's pivoted towards Russia since the military seized power in a coup in 2022. Right? It's just an example of how you get this back and forth between different powers in Africa competing for different interests. So this is huge, right? This is a huge problem. And what we're proposing is that this university can have an impact on this problem. That's what we're proposing, which it seems, it's kind of hard to imagine. But here's our proposal. How can we do this? Well, what is the etiology? I'm just curious as I talk through this. Does anybody have an idea of what I think the etiology is? What's the etiology? Let's go back to this. There's a common theme here. On the African side, we have a desire to elevate themselves out of poverty. On the richer nation, who said it? It's desire. How much does desire get us in trouble, right? Desire. And I don't think it's wrong. I don't think it's wrong to desire something. I don't think it's wrong to desire that we would want to become a greener nation. I don't think that's wrong. But what I think we need to add to our desire is a thoughtfulness. We need to add a thoughtfulness to our desire. So, and this is where we're going with this. So how do you increase thoughtfulness? Well, it's through education. Well, what is a university great at? I mean, that's our thing, right? We educate. And so right here, I've got a picture of Matt Jacobson. Next to that's Dr. Abby Workue, one of our fellows, and then Bakar Ramada, and then Dr. Solomon. So, and then Casey, where's Casey? Right, raise your hand. I didn't have a picture of you, but they make up our film and media team. Dr. Jacobson is a film and media professor. This project, in many respects, wouldn't be going without him. I just sent out an email to a professor in film and media at KU, and I said, I have this problem I need help with raising awareness about. And he just responded. This is how a university comes together, because through this, in my notes, I have the number of reels we've done. How many reels is it, Bacher? How many reels are we up to?
Like 50, 60.
50, 60 reels we've produced. And we've got a short form documentary on the trauma epidemic that we're getting ready to drop into film festivals. So plus we're doing a lecture series. So everybody can be a part of this. There's so many ways we're reaching out to people to raise awareness about this. And we're doing research on this, to make a change in the scientific community. So number one is, if you want to affect desire, you educate. And there's plenty of examples in American history of how people being educated about a particular problem have changed their attitude about something, and then that's made a tremendous impact. So that's one way. This just shows our team in Ethiopia. Here we are. I'd call this our situation room. When we were in Ethiopia and we would film, we'd come home at night, and this is a multidisciplinary team of people on the business side, people on the film and media side, nurses, medical students, residents. And we're all just looking at what this is just one of our trips we took. We've taken a couple of these, and we're just kind of talking about how do we best get this message out. So it's a lot of fun, but you can see it's late nights. We would work late into the night. All right, how much time we got? Okay. Do you guys do the medical students have to leave right at 1? Okay, all right. So we're gonna blaze through this for the sake of panel discussion. We discussed in our last lecture how trauma is treated, and I gave the analogy of reconstructing a house, and you can think of orthopedic surgeons as the carpenters of that house. Fractures are the most common outcome of an injury requiring treatment. Musculoskeletal injuries account for the majority of disability following trauma. What are the effects of trauma? I give an example of an open tibia fracture. The mortality of that is about 80 to 90% untreated. So orthopedic trauma, when practiced well, saves lives. And here's an example of an upper extremity injury, a Montesia fracture. This is a Galeazzi fracture of here on the left, and on the right's a femoral malunion. Both of these are examples of crippling injuries. And the fact that overall outcomes after serious trauma, in orthopedics in particular, are good when appropriate trauma and rehabilitation care are rendered. We have looked at what is coming into the Ethiopian trauma system. One of the places where we're trying to make an effect. What is it? 64% of the cases are orthopedic trauma, about 26% neurosurgical, 7% general surgical, 3% other. So the majority, and that just goes with this fact on the majority, fractures are the most common result of an injury requiring surgical treatment. So what is the bottleneck? The bottleneck, in order to receive a good outcome following a trauma, is a well-trained surgical team, appropriately equipped, in a well-designed facility. How can we achieve that? Or how can we unload this funnel here? You want this. You want somebody going right through the funnel. But oftentimes it's this. The wait list at Abbott Hospital is about 5,000. 5,000 people come in and they'll be turned away. And oftentimes when they call the family to call them back, the patient has died, right? It's a significant problem. How can we unload this bottleneck? What we can do is we can develop an orthopedic subspecialty hospital. By doing that, we can take the majority of these cases here off the hands of the public trauma system. That's one of the things we can do. And here's a problem with orthopedic trauma. If you have an open fracture versus a neurosurgical emergency, the neurosurgical emergency, or even the general surgical emergency, is going to get the operating room. The orthopedic trauma will be turned away. Even though that patient may die a month later, they get turned away. So you have this acuity problem. But here's the thing, that neurosurgical patient that got in right away, their outcome is not that good. They'll still more likely than not have neurologic deficits and be dependent on society. However, if you would have treated the open fracture, you could have got that patient back to doing what they did before. So the irony of this whole system is that the higher acuity, more resource demanding, and poor outcome trauma patients are often the ones that receive care, while the lower acuity patients do not receive care, and as a result, die or become disabled, rather than achieving the good to excellent results with fewer resources had they been treated initially. Our proposal is to partner with an African teaching institution, whether in Zambia or whether in Ethiopia, where we're currently working right now, medical companies, other nonprofits, government institutions, and faith communities to develop self-sustaining orthopedic trauma hospitals. Doing so will alleviate the public hospitals of the majority of operative trauma they are seeing, allowing them to treat the higher acuity, more resource demanding trauma. Sorry I brought that to a close so quick, but I want to have a time to have people ask questions. For an American university to accomplish this, it requires a collaboration of multiple schools of study to include medicine, nursing, allied health, business, architecture, film and media, history and philosophy, economics, and other liberal arts. All right. So helping do the panel discussion today is our 2023 Romanian team who traveled with me to Romania. Colin Frecking, Laura Jackson, and Michael Brahman. Why don't you guys come on up? Lori is a nurse who works with me in the operating room. She's also on the board of the International Orthopedic Trauma Collaborative. She's also going to join our panel discussion. And Otis, also a medical student here, recently graduated, who spent some time in Ethiopia. Okay, go ahead, Colin.
Yes.
And if you have to leave, feel free to leave. Yeah.
I know it's getting close to 1, and we'll actually have to run out here around 1 as well. But if you guys have any questions, especially students, about the medical student perspective of why we're involved in this mission, the impact we feel like we can have in these countries, as well as our experiences of traveling internationally and working within the orthopedic trauma community, I'll open the floor to the questions now.
I would love to hear just briefly, because I know we're short on time, kind of what each of your individual responsibilities looked like in the lead up to your trip, and then once you were there, what did that project look like from you guys' lens, and what were you individually responsible for?
Yeah, so as you can see, there's been a couple trips to Ethiopia, and after our first year of medical school, there was conversations about going there, but at that time, the civil unrest and the civil war going on was so dangerous that we were not able to go, and so we traveled to Romania, where Dr. Heading started his kind of dive into international health, and there we worked with their orthopedic traumatologists who have, in the past decade, exponentially increased their resources as well as their training in treating orthopedic trauma. And they kind of, I would say, and I don't know if you would agree with this, Dr. Headings, are kind of the example of the impact that you can have when you provide these surgeons that want to help their community with the resources and training necessary to have an impact. So we got to go work with them and see firsthand the great work that they're doing now and the ability they have to care for the people in their community.
I'll talk just briefly about responsibilities before, and then I'll let Michael talk about the paper that we ended up doing while we were out there. But a lot of the work before, us three specifically, we joined in around December ATI. And then, we're involved in the weekly meetings. We're involved, us as medical students, we're in charge mostly of the research, like what kind of research are we going to perform in these countries. One of my research projects I have is actually in Zambia, so working with the doctors in Zambia and Dr. Kinder. So a lot of it is finding projects that will help what we're trying to accomplish as part of ATI. And then obviously going out and having the experiences, and we talked a lot about how medical students and medical professionals, especially in the US, get jaded, from the first year of medical school through that, even into being an attending and going and seeing different environments and different patient populations, different physicians. I think just gives a really good perspective. That's something that I at least think about all the time now, and how I want to treat patients and what I think is important. But I'll let Michael speak about the paper because I think that's most important.
Sure. So I think, everyone's touched on good points. I think we spent some time talking about the fellowship that Dr. Headings had started with the focus on Africa, but another piece kind of getting back to this theme of how education can change a lot of these outcomes, and particularly where kind of all of us come in, is, Dr. Headings is so, focused on also having us be able to have these experiences internationally, like Laura mentioned, to kind of, increase our exposure and also, deal with some of that burnout that's so common when we're getting, crushed by the first couple of years of didactic work. And then, hand in hand with that, Dr. Headings has also astutely noticed that research can be a vehicle with which we can also develop new understandings, kind of find, other etiologies at which we can approach these types of problems. So, my time in Romania was a little bit different than my two colleagues that also went. I spent most of my time with the anesthesiologists in Romania. And anesthesia is pretty interesting there. They are responsible for surgical and perioperative anesthesia as well as critical care and the ICU all at once. So it's very interesting to get to spend time with them. Really, when we had embarked on that journey, the kind of research question of interest that I had, which is something that I've thought about for a long time. My mom is a pharmacist by training, and she spent a lot of time working at the state level related to the opioid crisis, not only in our state, but nationally. So it's something that I had just kind of had exposure to growing up, and was something I was sensitive to when we went there. Because the way in which obviously dealing with perioperative pain management is incredibly significant in, not only in surgery, but also very specific to orthopedic surgery, some of the most challenging perioperative pain to control. And the unique part is that, unfortunately, the United States is a bit of an outlier in how poorly our outcomes have, diverged with the use of opiates. Particularly, we have this landscape of medical transition into this new wave of kind of synthetic opiates and how, and terrible overdose death tolls that's had kind of on the national level. And the unique thing about it was going to Romania, they use basically zero opiates. I asked a handful of anesthesiologists how many times have you prescribed an oral opiate for anyone, either in the perioperative setting or for some other sort of chronic pain. And I think I only had one person say once. Everyone else said zero. So that kind of, it obviously, when you hear something like that, it begs the question, like, tell me what you're doing to manage pain. So I got to spend, about a little over a week there kind of observing, and, there were a handful of different medications that they utilized, one of which really caught our interest in that spun off into kind of a handful of papers. Is this unique drug called metamizole that we can't use in the United States. Actually ended up being a bit of a kind of this investigative endeavor, more so than research. Where, it's been in the United States. Turns out it looks like the original data that decision was made by the FDA doesn't really make a lot of sense. It was done in concurrently in people receiving high-dose chemotherapy. The concern was agranulocytosis, but high-dose chemotherapy also causes agranulocytosis. So just opening our minds to the potential that, like, maybe Western medicine isn't all-knowing, and there are big things that we might be missing, times where we go wrong.
Such a good point. I mean, we learn from them just as much as they learn from us. And we never would have been exposed to that medication had we not traveled there. And the work Michael and Colin and Laura has done on that's just been tremendous. So it could have a huge impact on the way we treat pain in America. There have been other people jumping on board with that too. I've seen, but the advantage we have is we get to work in a place where they routinely use this medication all the time.
Yeah, I mean, just to summarize what everybody said here, I can talk more about like experiences, because I've had a lot of chances to go to Africa through my PhD work with the Office of International Education, as also with through ATI going to Ethiopia twice, now one for a week and one for a month as a rotation. And just experience-wise, like, here we just don't have the numbers that they have. So like you don't get to work as much with the team. And I think that's one thing that, like, when you open your eyes to another culture, and open your eyes to what they do, like we said, we learn a lot from them. There's different approaches. I think Dr. Haddix has told me that he's even thought of non-operative options to humorous factors that he learned from Romanians that he was never taught here. So there's like, when you diversify your education that way, that's one way that you just learn more. I've learned a lot. Like, and I've been on a bunch of orthopedic rotations here, and I'll say what I learned in Ethiopia was like 3 times more than what I learned in the rotations that I had here. And that's not to knock on our education system here. It's just the volume that they have and the amount of opportunities you have to get involved. Rather than, so I highly encourage everybody to try to get international work. I think what Dr. Heddings was saying earlier when it comes to collaborative work, I think in that collaboration is where you really learn where your weaknesses, where your biases are, and the biases of our education. They're not biases that you personally may hold, but it's just the way we've been educated. That when we share that, we actually uncover something new and more like holistic from that. Research has a big part of that. That's one avenue. One is just talking with the other colleagues and seeing how they do things. When you're in a resource lore environment that has a lot of infections, you learn how to deal with infections very well. Whereas we don't have that, and we can be very wasteful here. But when you don't have the technology like we have here, you can see the outcomes and how much difference. And we do have papers on that show like, okay, this is the differences that we see. And it's really not because someone's not educated. Everybody's smart here. Like people around the world are very smart. It's really just because they don't have the resources or they don't have the access to, in Ethiopia, they have 4 OR rooms for the whole country dealing with all this trauma. That's it, 4. Am I right, Dr. Isaac? That's it. We have 4 OR rooms. That's nothing compared to what we have here in ability. So like, you can't expect the outcomes to be the same. So, but if that's the problem, that's a problem we can fix. And I think that's what ATI really tries to go at a 3-pronged approach, that sharing education between each other. And that's like the first thing, making sure we're on the same page. Second thing is making sure we have the same equipment so that we can actually have this best treatment for everybody. And then building sustainable suburbs so that it's not like, oh, hey, these people constantly will need help. It will be, they can do it on their own and we'll learn from them as well.
So I think it's a little past 1. So for the medical students, I want to make sure they get out of here. Thank you guys for coming. For those of you that need to leave, feel free to leave. And then there's more people that probably want to stay for further discussion. I saw there was a raised hand on the Zoom chat. Clint Adams.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Glenn Adams. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology at KU, and more importantly for this conversation, the director of the Kansas African Study Center. And thanks for the presentation. I think you expressed a lot of thoughts about the way that a university could approach some of these questions that we try to do at the Kansas African Study Center. So I'm going to put a couple pitches in for people who may not be aware of the activities there. The Kansas African Study Center is a unit that is not part of any academic department. It transcends all the academic departments at the university. Can you hear me? I'm in an airport.
No,
lounge,
sorry. Say that again. Laura, thank you. Colin, Laura, Michael, thank you so much. Everybody who came, thank you so much on the medical student side. Those who want to stay and ask questions, feel free to stay. Lori, coming up here, you're on the panel. Yep. Okay, Glenn, can you please, sorry, we had a lot of technical difficulties today. My apologies. We got started late. And then, but can you ask that again? So you're from the Department of Psychology?
Yeah, sorry, I'm also in an airport lounge, so this may be contributing to the difficulty. But yeah, I'm the Department of Psychology at KU and also the director of the Kansas African Study Center. And I wanted to note that the Kansas African Study Center is not a teaching department. It's a unit that transcends the entire university, including the Med Center, where we're interested in people who are doing research from different departments, but with a common understanding of situations in the African context, as you've described so well in your presentation. So I think that our missions resonate quite well, and I'd be interested to talk to you more. I want to say that we're not the only area study center at KU. There are a bunch of other area study centers for different geographic regions, and I would encourage anyone there who's doing work similar to what you're doing to check out those. And I know that Kimberly is in contact with many of these units, and she can be a nice conduit for the resources that they have. Finally, I put a note in the chat, but I'll just make the announcement here. We are, yeah, Dr. Headings, I know you presented at the MOS conference, the Mid-America Alliance for African Studies 2 years ago. They're having another conference at the end of this month, also at KU Med Center. And it would be great if you or your students, especially the students who are on the panel, if they wanted to present about some of their work and their experiences. I think there are a lot of interesting intersections that we might find and develop, especially as you've been doing with film and media and some of others on the list that you presented at the end about the whole university approach. I'm very, very encouraged to hear that and hope that we can have some conversations about that later. So it's not really a question, more of a plug. I'm going to get off the call because I have to go catch a plane, but thank you very much for your presentation.
Hey, thank you so much. Let's get together. Love it. Thanks, Glenn. Also on the call, we've got 2 of our former fellows, Dr. Kinda and Dr. Solomon. I'm just curious, Dr. Kinda, Dr. Solomon, do you guys have any thoughts, anything you'd like to say about this brief overview? Anything you'd like to correct? Do you think my assessment was accurate, or would you have anything to add to it?
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Hey, Dr. Solomon.
Okay. Are you hearing? Oh. thank you for your excellent presentation today. Your presentation is exactly what we planned and what we had been working for the last almost 2 years. So congratulations for your nice and excellent presentation. We all you are presented today is the real thing, what we did, what we see practically. So I want to say again, congratulations.
Well, thank you so much. And have you had a chance to get any good barbecue?
Yeah, I love that barbecue. Yeah, especially barbecue number 38 or another barbecue.
Your Mongolian barbecue.
Mongolia barbecue is the best one. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I diverged. Patrick, how are you? Hey, thank you so much, Dr. Solomon, for being here.
Okay. You're welcome.
Does anybody have any questions? Dr. Solomon is practicing in Ethiopia. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Solomon? I'm just curious. And that's okay. We lost most of our students. So, Patrick, anything you want to say? Dr. Kinda?
Yes, okay. Are you getting me?
We sure are, yeah.
Yes, okay. I enjoy your presentation, Archie. That was actually perfect, and that's actually what is happening here. When I was there at the KU, I think there's something which I was impressed with because I was able to see the same type of fracture, same type of X-ray, the same like what you have here. But the more important things was how easy it was to fix those fracture. Okay, I was just I had that feeling like it was just easy to do those surgeries than the difficulty I can meet here. You remember last week on Thursday, actually, I told you that I was about to fix the ankle fracture, which
Yes.
yes, it was actually a type C, and it happened about 5 weeks ago. And the patient came to the hospital. I actually told him that you see, it's going to be difficult to reduce this fracture. If we can't manage to reduce it, then I'm going to fuse it. And what happened? It's not like the patient didn't have money or whatever to come to the hospital. It's only he was in the wrong hands, and he was told that it was okay just to put a cast and you are going to walk. And that's why he spent 5 weeks before he reached to our hospital. And I told him, you need surgery. But what happened is when I went into surgery, it was quite difficult to reduce that fracture, almost impossible. And I tried to use the small fragment, which I was supposed to use there, and it was actually difficult to reduce it. And what I did, I went to get a big plate, which I was supposed to use on the femur, a standard plate, and that's what I put on the ankle to man, and I managed at least to reduce that fracture. When you see the last X-ray, it looks tremendous, but there's a wrong plate, which I was not supposed to use in the ankle. And why? Because that patient didn't meet the right person to tell him how that fracture is supposed to be fixed. And that's one of the big challenge we have here. And your presentation that said it all, that was good.
You're
Thank
going
you.
to change that. Yeah, thank you, Patrick. You're going to change that. You're going to change that. You're going to educate everybody and they're going to know. So it's unfortunate that happens, but at the same time, you're going to make a big change. Let's see, we have some questions here. Kim, yes, education is the answer, and I do appreciate your broad approach to include international relations, economics, etc. What created the understanding of partnership in education over in and out mission trips that so many individuals participate in? How did you come to this understanding of the power of education and partnerships? Oh, and there's a question for Dr. Solomon and Dr. Abbey. Given the volume of patients, how do you prioritize care? Is Dr. Solomon still on? How do you prioritize care there, Dr. Solomon? I said what I thought I saw was it was acuity, and then it was also kind of just random or chance. And Dr. Beza can weigh in too. But how is it you prioritize care at Abbott?
We prioritize for emergency cases only. We are not doing surgery for elective cases.
And how easy is it to get an elective case at Abbott? Does it ever happen?
Yeah, because we are working hard to complete the emergency cases, so that usually they are waiting for more than 1 year or 2 years. So it is very difficult for us to have to get bed for elective patients and table for OR. So we are occupied by doing usually an emergency patients.
And I think when we say elective, really, I think we're talking about a necessary orthopedic surgery, but something that's not immediately life-threatening or limb-threatening. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it gets to that point I was talking about where, you know, the cases that really have the poorest outcomes in some respect and take the most resources are the ones that make it in. And the ones that you could get a good outcome from and treat with lower resources from, you can't even get those in, which is very disappointing. And one thing I'll just say in response to Kim's question on how did I come to the realization of, where's that question at? Of working together. That was heavily influenced by Lou Zirkle of Sign Nail. Lou Zirkle, before I started doing international work, I was put in contact with him and he just talked with me for quite some time. And he gave me his philosophy on doing international work. And he said, when you go international, don't go there to necessarily tell somebody how to do something. Just go there and see how they work, see how they treat their patients, see what resources they have, and just help. That's what he told me. He said, just go there and just offer to help. And it was the best advice I was ever given. He's a very wise man. He's done very great things throughout the world. So that's the person who really influenced me there. And then the other thing I'd like to lead into is nursing, because we have Lori on the panel here. We've got Kara also went to Romania with us, and I don't want to neglect the nursing component of this, who, by the way, Dr. Seesaw at St. Paul's Millennium Medical Center, who's the provost there, said this, in his mind, this was the most important component of all that we're doing, is the nursing component of this. Dr. Solomon, Dr. Patrick, Dr. Beza, feel free to speak up. How important are well-trained nurses to the outcome of your patients and to you during your job?
You know, the nurse's job, especially in the OR, is as important as the one of the surgeons what's going to do, because we use we have guidance in orthopedics, and everyone should know what material to give you when you are going to operate. And most of our nurses are not trained, or they don't know the sex, the materials, the size, and they are not trained in that way. Most of them were doing just a general surgery case, not an orthopedic case. So we have a difficulty in understanding, and I mean, that thing will make you to take your surgery longer. So the longer surgery and the complications follows in terms of bleeding and even the outcome in terms of bone unit. So that's really matters in training the nurses there. And we can't afford an infection so all the burden that happening. So it's very important. It's as equally like training the fellow, training the nurses. it's also resource savings, it's quite important.
Okay, what I can say, you see, when I prepare my surgery list, what I do usually, I just put the type of surgery I'm going to do, and the nurse knows what I need. Okay, I don't need to explain which type of instrument I need. Okay, I want everything to be done, means the nurse is ready with everything because she knows all the step of surgery we're going to do and which instrument I did. And definitely, if you don't have a well-trained nurse in surgery, it's just going to make your work difficult. That's a point. It's going to make your work difficult. That's what I can say.
I love that word difficult. Without a good nurse, things are immensely difficult. And not only that, I mean, to Dr. Baez's point, you can't even really operate efficiently. You're gonna have infections, you can have complications that could cost the patient their life. It just doesn't happen without nurses, period. Dr. Solomon, did you have something you want to say on that?
Yeah, since we haven't a vendor providing instrument and the nurses cover this work also. They cover as a working as a vendor, as a technician, as a cleaner. Everything is responsibility around operation room area. So I think they have to train also. They have to upgrade their knowledge, skill to cope up with trained fellowship. So we need this training also for the nurse also. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear from our, oh, do I have a question? Yes.
So I was just wondering because, so you talked about how you want it to be self-sustaining. I believe at the last one, you talked about building a hospital. So I'm curious in the approach of how you all working together, like the plan of it becoming self-sustaining.
Such a good question. So Dr. Kenda actually has a self-sustaining hospital in Zambia. Now, the way it works is, our proposed model is similar to Dr. Kenda's hospital. Because if you think about it, there's a huge number of individuals in Africa that can't pay for their health care. So where does that come from? Well, if you think about our society or our culture, you know, the great educators, and the researchers, that's the university. And so we're great at training. We're not so great at necessarily raising money for just charitable things, but that's where the faith community comes in. If you look at one of our lectures, I think one of the last lectures is living your faith in the practice of medicine while respecting others, right? Because in Ethiopia is a good example. It's basically half Muslim, half Christian. But this country, they live together, the Muslims and the Christians, at least the way I see it, they seem like they live together very well. And here in the university, I mean, there's several different faiths that come together. And I feel like a lot of faiths have in common a desire to help people in need. It's just an easy thing. So the church that supports Patrick's Hospital is the Catholic Church. But I think you get donations from other groups as well. And our plan is we've reached out to faith communities to ask for their support to build a pot of money to pay for the surgeries for the uninsured patients until Africa gets to a point where, you know, the health insurance is at a level that, you know, you don't have to do that. But for right now, we need that. So just to give you an idea, there's a group called Made to Flourish. Made to Flourish, that's a Christian organization, but they're focused more on what they call common good type initiatives, not necessarily building a church, but they want to do things that are just good for everybody. They don't care who they are, just making the world a better place. And so they've asked us to come speak at their conference, and it's a group of like 200 churches from around the nation. So we're gonna pitch this to, we're pitching this to faith communities. In answer to your question, because we can't make it sustainable without money coming in from somewhere to pay for the patients that can't pay for their care.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah,
Just to like clarify as well, like the organization is set up in a way that, I think like the three-pronged approach is really important. Like education is number one, right? Because you can build a facility, you can do all kinds of things, and if people don't know how to use it, then there's no point in doing that, right? The second thing is, and that goes both ways. Both the organization, although like all of us are faith-based, the goal of the organization is not spreading a faith or whatnot. This is not a mission-oriented work. This is a work that is focused on uplifting communities here and abroad. And that means with the collaboration, we learn how to uplift our own area, but also uplift that area. And specifically, like part of my PhD work was working in cultural collaboration and how to make sure that we're not imposing our way of life on another way, and making sure it's a homegrown facility. But the process for that, I think that's really important to understand is there's a value to education. There's a value to making sure that they have the required things that allows them to apply the education that they have. And then having opportunities for our students to go there, their students to come here. Building a sustainable project, that's a long-term project. It's not going to happen overnight, obviously. And so there's like a stepwise way to get to that point. You build the infrastructure through education, through the funding, through all of these aspects. You get that, and then the building comes up, and then it's usable. And then it's not something that where these countries are dependent on the richer countries to continue providing care. And I think that's what major impact of education is that this is like starting it up so that they can do it by themselves. And I think KU specifically has a very good history of doing this. One of the reasons I was ever attracted to this group was because I had a mentor, Dr. Mani, who was very involved in the plastic surgery. And he did a very similar work in other areas through our KU program, where he was like, I'll work with burn units and other places, but it's not like, oh, hey, we need to keep going back there. Now those burn units run on their own, without intervention from us. So I think it's, there is a plan, and it's not although we reach out to faith-based communities and people of good-hearted nature, I think it's really important to differentiate that this is not a mission-based work. This is not a short-term project. This is a very much long-term vision to uplift people around the world, including ourselves.
and it's like, we've got our business team that have projected financial models for how much money we have to make, how much we have to charge for certain procedures. So that's why it's not just a medicine thing. It's like we need the business team on the KU side to help us with. Our chief business officer is a graduate from the MBA school here at KU. So yeah, there's so much involved. We're sending a shipping container to Ethiopia with medical equipment. We're sending a shipping container to Zambia with medical equipment to outfit their operating rooms. And we're starting there in terms of just seeing how the passage of equipment works, how to get through custom, all these things. And then today I was meeting with architects who are doing some designs on a hospital that we have identified that's being built that we would like to get into. So yeah, but it is a very long process. And we're learning. So, yeah. All right, I think any other questions? Thanks everybody so much for coming. Thank you all so much. Feel free to come to all of these, and hopefully we won't have the technical difficulties, these next ones that we had at today's meeting.
Where can they find the last one?